Here, hang on, folks. The president already canceling that meeting with Vladimir Putin, tweeting this: based on the fact that the ships and sailors have not been returned to Ukraine from Russia, I've decided it would be best for all parties concerned to cancel my previously scheduled meeting in Argentina with President Vladimir Putin. I look forward to a meaningful summit again as soon as the situation is resolved. Kevin Cork standing by live, traveling with the president live in Argentina there. Hey, Kevin, good morning.
Morning, my friend. I want to share for the folks at home a new picture that we've just gotten here as we continue our coverage of the G20. Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, has arrived here. This is obviously important because there had been some speculation that the president and President Putin, talking about President Trump and President Putin, would ultimately meet. Despite the back and forth about what happened between Russia and Ukraine, there had been some percolation behind the scenes. Hey, maybe they'll work this thing out and meet after all, but we have just learned that right now the U.S. has no intentions for a pull-aside between the leader of our country and Russia's leader. Meanwhile, calling this a win for American farmers and in particular U.S. manufacturers, the president today, Bill, joined his counterparts from Mexico and Canada in signing the USMCA trade agreement, which effectively replaces NAFTA, which U.S. officials called unfair to American interests. The president said this is a win for all parties involved.
The USMCA is the largest, most significant, modern and balanced trade agreement in history. All of our countries will benefit greatly. As part of our agreement, the United States will be able to lock in our market access to Canada and Mexico and greatly expand our agricultural exports, something we've been wanting to do for many years.
The signing is the culmination, Bill, of fierce negotiations played out from Ottawa and Washington, obviously down to Mexico City. A very interesting signing to watch today. Historic moment for the president, obviously, as well as his counterparts from Canada and Mexico. By the way, I want to share this from Twitter. The president was just on Twitter not long ago hailing this deal. He said this: just signed one of the most important and largest trade deals in U.S. and world history. The United States, Mexico, and Canada worked so well together in crafting this great document. The terrible NAFTA will soon be gone. The USMCA will be fantastic, he says, for all. Now, to that, let's just tell you about this. Canada's Justin Trudeau, the prime minister there, called this deal, Bill, a beginning and not an end, noting the huge tariffs on his country's steel and aluminum sectors.
As I discussed with President Trump a few days ago, the recent plant closures by General Motors, which affects thousands of Canadian and American workers and their families, are a heavy blow. Make no mistake, we will stand up for our workers and fight for their families and their communities. And Donald, it's all the more reason why we need to keep working to remove the tariffs on steel and aluminum between our countries.
That from earlier today with the leader from Canada and Mexico, now live to Argentina. President Trump arriving on the red carpet, Sandra.
And what a moment this is. And of course, this is the moment when 20 leading industrialized and emerging economies come together. They account for 85% of GDP, 2/3 of the population of the world. This all coming directly off the G20 website. But world leaders, this is a moment, and certainly trade will be front and center. Big discussions about to be had, and still questions over who exactly the president will be meeting with. Vladimir Putin still a big question mark.
You think about the stakes and how high they are for the economies of the United States and China, and whether or not these two men can get together and forge a deal during these meetings in Argentina, it is debatable. Want to bring in America's A-Team with us today. Juan Williams, co-host of The Five. How you doing, Juan?
Good morning.
Nice tie. Ed Henry is back in New York City. Call the mayor's office. Ed, good morning to you. I see. And Shelby Holiday's with us, too, from the Wall Street Journal. Shelby, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Let's...
By the way, you add Hammer to the table, you got 90% of the world's GDP.
I appreciate that.
Very nice.
Checks in the mail. What does he need to get done here?
He needs to have a positive dinner with the president of China. I think this Canada, Mexico, U.S. trade deal is big. There were a lot of key players who put it together. And go back to the 2016 campaign. This is a classic Trump move where he said, art of the deal, I can renegotiate this. And practically everyone, even in his own party, said, You can't renegotiate NAFTA, buddy. You can't. This is a pie-in-the-sky thing. Canada and Mexico said, we're not going to, and they did. And the U.S. got a pretty good deal here. So I think it sets the table for the main event, which is the dinner tomorrow night between President Trump and President Xi of China. The world is waiting. That's not an exaggeration. I mean, I've covered a lot of these G20s, Bush, Obama, and Trump. And they're snoozers. You know, everyone sits around, communiques, and all of this nonsense. This is a big trade deal to set the table, but everyone's watching. They need to have some sort of a deal, a truce, if you will, on the tariff battle, whether you want to call it a trade war or whatnot. And if they get some sort of a deal tomorrow night, China and the U.S. at dinner, the president's going to have a huge summit, number one, and number two, the markets are going to be rocking next week.
Just to update you on the G20, we had to go through this ourselves. 19 member nations plus the European Union. When you watched that signing ceremony this morning, what message did it send not only to the G20 members but to the world?
Well, I do think Ed's right. It was a table setter for this big meeting to come. And I think trade is the focus. You know, so often we talk about foreign policy and all of these different things leaders are discussing. With Trump at the table, it's all about trade. And so it sends a message that Trump is serious about his trade deals. He is serious about the pledges he made on the campaign trail. And by the way, he's actually able to accomplish some of the things he set out to accomplish. Whether or not he's doing it in a posture that people like or not, you know, you talk to a lot of Trump supporters who say, I don't really love the rhetoric and the things he's saying, but what he is doing, they fully get behind. And I think that's the signal he's sending.
The competing visions of these two countries, Shelby, and Juan to you on this as well. President Xi has an idea for where he wants to take China. And President Trump has an idea where he wants to take the U.S. economy. And a lot of this comes down to protecting your intellectual property and not allowing other governments, other countries to allow their people to imitate the product you produce. This is front and center for the West Wing and the White House.
Well,
Can they make headway?
Well, I think they will make some headway on intellectual property in terms of the deals. The bigger problem for President Trump is manufacturing, and that's why he's been imposing these tariffs, is to try to equalize the table. I mean, obviously this week the United States suffered in terms of the GM layoffs, 14,000 people. We've seen contraction in terms of things like Carrier, Harley-Davidson moving overseas because of tariffs and the like. And I think that, you know, the markets have been unstable for the last month and, in fact, given back much of what we gained during 2018. So the president understands the economy now is in a difficult place. That's why he's been going after Jerome Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve, saying that he said that Jay Powell's a bigger problem than China, Bill, and that he regrets having named him. And he picked him, and he regrets having named him. So the economy becomes very large. I would differ from this panel in only this regard. I think that the decision to cancel the meeting with Vladimir Putin is going to have real immediate impact. In the sense that we have ongoing trouble here at home in terms of the investigation into President Trump, the guilty plea that was filed yesterday by Michael Cohen, his personal lawyer for a long time. And the question is, you know, who is going to confront Putin on what he is doing in Ukraine, if not the President of the United States?
You can't have a meeting if they've got sailors held hostage on behalf of Ukraine.
Well, but you got somebody should say something to them.
Naval ships as well.
Who knows what's going to happen?
The Kremlin led the way on this story all week. They said, oh, we're going to sit down for 2 hours. We're going to meet. The White House took about 2 days to confirm that. And then the president backed out of it yesterday after he left the White House. Today, the Kremlin, Ed, is saying again that they will have some
could be on the sidelines. Could be a whole.
Which happens frequently. And maybe that happens in the room you're looking at right now.
Juan is right. That a signal has to be sent to Putin, whether it's President Trump or someone else, is a golden opportunity, I think, for President Trump, who's had this critics.
So the signal is we're not going to meet and talk.
We're not going to meet, but maybe if you have a conversation on the sidelines, you got to release these sailors from Ukraine, first of all. They've now been sentenced to, I think, a couple of months in jail by a Russian court. It's basically a kangaroo court. This is ridiculous. And President Trump, before he was president, slammed President Obama over the Russians taking Crimea and whatnot, and you got to stand up on the world stage. I think the president hasn't gotten enough credit, by the way, for sanctioning Russia and taking tough moves against Russia previously and helping Ukraine with military aid, for example. He doesn't get credit. The kind of aid that Barack Obama did not provide to the Ukrainians and that the Russians hate. But given what happened in Helsinki, this president should stand up to President Putin at this summit.
Just to give an update here on what you're seeing on your screen, this is the president of the G20, the president of Argentina, shaking hands and greeting world leaders as they step onto the stage. As we await, we will watch them one by one take that stage before they take that family photo, Shelby. And as we look on, we wonder where the next couple of days will take us.
Yeah, this is sort of like the red carpet for the G20. So you see everyone showing up and everyone looks happy. A little different from some of the other summits that we've seen in the past year or two. But back to Russia, I do think that it is a signal that President Trump is not sitting down with Vladimir Putin. That in and of itself is a statement that he's making to Russia. He's been friendly with Vladimir Putin in the past. This is a different tone he's striking. This is a very different tone. So I do think that in and of itself communicates something about the Ukrainian situation and about some of the things Putin has been doing. But you cannot ignore what's going on at home here either with the Russia investigation.
And to your point, Bill, and
all of the
Shelby's,
developments coming out of that.
After the president said, I'm not going to meet with Putin, I saw the Kremlin putting out these statements saying, no, we're still going to. The point being, they were on defense. Yep. They were almost begging for this meeting. They want the meeting.
That's what I take from that.
They want to get to the table. That shows President Trump maybe having the upper hand. But again, he's got to seize that opportunity, use the upper hand to say, knock this off.
What is your sense, you guys covered many presidents from the White House, when you get outside the bubble? Is it a good thing? Do you get refreshed? Do you get away from the trappings of Washington, D.C.?
Absolutely.
Or do you watch the events that we watched yesterday for a period of 3 hours here on our program with Michael Cohen, a surprise appearance in Lower Manhattan before a judge? And when you go to a meeting like this, and how do these foreign leaders look at you then when they know you're up against these legal headwinds back at home?
Yeah, I know from talking to some of the president's most senior advisors, they've told me for months that that's one of his biggest frustrations and why he calls it a witch hunt. It's not just politics. It's that he's frustrated that on the world stage, the president, other leaders see him as wounded. Other leaders see him as having this cloud over his head. Now, you can argue whether he and some of his folks created some of the cloud, whether it's Michael Cohen, General Flynn, and others, didn't tell the truth. And if you could sit down with the FBI, you ought to tell the truth, and maybe the cloud wouldn't be so big. On the other hand, how this investigation started with a look at alleged Russian interference in the 2016 campaign, and now we're looking at a real estate transaction that didn't happen, and somehow that many in the mainstream media are saying this is going to bring down Donald Trump. You can understand, I think, why President Trump would be frustrated that this started as one thing and has become something else, as we see in many special counsel investigations.
You know what's the difference from the time I was covering White House and stuff, and maybe even from Ed, although Ed's much more recent vintage, is the degree to which social media and technology connects the president as he goes overseas and tries to get out of the bubble you're talking about, Bill. So that the president's been tweeting, even on the plane and now in Argentina, about local things, books he wants to sell, many by us at Fox News. And he's engaged, and he's very much aware of the kind of coverage, the headlines in today's paper about Michael Cohen's guilty plea and the connections that are being made to the what Ed referred to, the real estate deal, the idea of building a Trump Tower in Moscow, and whether or not there was going to be a $50 million penthouse made available to Vladimir Putin. All of that is in his head, and believe me, it's in the head of the people that he's meeting with.
How much do we really think has changed since yesterday? There are countless theories, but what has fundamentally changed that we can say for certain about this Mueller matter?
Well, we know for certain that Michael Cohen is cooperating with Mueller, and Mueller takes him seriously enough to allow him to plead guilty. It's a signal that Mueller believes Cohen and will continue to work with him. But I also think, if you talk to a lot of legal experts, they say what has changed is that Mueller is sending a signal to Trump that he knows something about this deal and possibly about other things Michael Cohen has told Mueller that we are not privy to. And that's a signal to Trump that Mueller understands some of the lies that have been told to Congress and possibly some of the lies that President Trump wrote down in those answers to him, because President Trump was asked about the Trump Tower deal. Initially, it was a little weird yesterday. Rudy Giuliani came out and said Michael Cohen was lying, and then later sort of walked that back and said Michael Cohen saying exactly what President Trump said in his answers.
Well, the other comment Giuliani offered, apparently the Wall Street Journal and others, is that the answers that the president provided were consistent.
Right, and I spoke to
that was the second. That came out later after he said.
But one thing I would say to what you're saying there is I spoke to Rudy Giuliani last night, and he told me directly that the president's answers are not in conflict. You see the president there, and we lost it. He insists, Rudy Giuliani, that there is no conflict
to the stage there. Big questions about some of the interaction that we might see on that stage in a few moments, and of course we'll all be watching on for that, right, Ed?
Absolutely, no doubt about it. And how will he interact, for example, with Putin? Not just because of the situation in Ukraine, but because of this investigation. I react to something Juan just said about, well, they got the written answers and maybe Mueller sprung a trap on the president. Maybe an unfortunate phrasing there, but that's exactly what the Trump team has been saying all along, that they think is a witch hunt about this, that it was a trap, that they were trying to set the president up rather than getting the truth, rather than just saying what really happened on the real estate deal, what happened with the Comey firing, what happened with this and that. And that all along this has been an effort to just catch him in a perjury trap. When we all know the Justice Department guidelines suggest, anyway, the precedent is, you can't indict the president. So at the end of this, it's highly unlikely the president would be indicted even if they think they found something wrong. So the question to me is, Michael Cohen, one of the things he said in this plea yesterday was that he didn't just brief individual number one about the real estate deal, but family members of the president. And I think that may be something that Mueller is zeroing in on.
If that's the case, then, Ed, we're looking at 2019, 2020.
This may drag on a lot longer.
I mean, 2 weeks ago, everybody, there's Putin. First time we have seen him, I do believe, on camera there. Vladimir Putin in Argentina. We'll see what comes of that. Just trying to...
There's another.
Yes, Mohammed bin Salman from Saudi Arabia. The White House said this week that there will not be a meeting between the president and MBS in this meeting here in Argentina. You know, the pushback on behalf of Capitol Hill, Republicans and Democratic senators alike were saying that, you know, the money that the U.S. is giving Saudi Arabia to fight that war in Yemen should be extracted. That was a major sticking point for the White House when you think about Mike Pompeo and James Mattis going to brief those senators behind closed doors to say, look, Saudi Arabia may not be the greatest friend, but you're dealing with a tough neighborhood. There's the Japanese president as well. You're dealing with a tough neighborhood, and they are helping the U.S. with efforts in Baghdad to help stabilize that government, and they are helping in the region to push back on Iran.
Iran is the big part, and the president has cited that again and again. You see Theresa May there. Obviously, she's dealing with the fallout from Brexit and coming up with a plan. There are a lot of
going on.
Yeah, a lot of world leaders who have big problems back home.
What's remarkable is the times, and Juan, you referred to this, the times we've covered these meetings and nothing comes from them, Shelby. It's a communique that was probably arranged and written before the thing even started. This is an entire... As we reflect on President Trump's first trip to NATO, that's really when we understood how he was going to conduct his own personal relationship with world leaders. He's going to poke the bear.
If he doesn't like the communique,
and again and again. And so there will be headlines from this in a way that we are not
he was flying
typically
back from the G7 from Canada, and on Air Force One he saw the Canadian Prime Minister having a news conference poking at the president. The president went on Twitter and said, I'm not playing with this anymore, and blew the whole thing up.
It's always fascinating to watch the body language.
Well,
There's been a bit of that.
I also like to watch the positioning, because this is all very much like a Saturday night prom, and everybody's position has been predetermined as they stand.
The names on the floor, right?
Exactly.
Well, and think about when they announced the trade deal, and you had the Canadian, Mexican, and U.S. leaders, and the president was front and center, number one, and spoke first, and made it clear that this was the deal that he brought together.
We're just going to...
How much did that cost?
How much did that cost? And that was the first shot he fired at these NATO members to say, you got to pony up more money for your own defense.
Yeah, the U.S. is paying for that building. The U.S. dues are paying for that expensive building at NATO.
U.S. dues are also paying for world stability. Because he feels like it's a real estate deal, and I understand that. You know, and NATO members pay up their fair share, their agreed
and many
upon.
of them are starting to do that. I just think there's all these relationships are more fascinating in ways we have never seen.
It's the Trump factor, isn't it?
It's the Trump factor.
That's what you just said about NATO.
And the Trump factor in Argentina rolls on. So get a quick break here. We'll be back in a moment here. We'll cover this and a lot more here on America's Newsroom. G20 summit's underway in Argentina. We saw the class photo a moment ago. Will we see movement now on China with trade? Will that move the markets, or are we getting ready for a long haul? Charles Payne, host of Making Money. Charles Payne, 2 o'clock Eastern Time, Fox Business Network. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
What do you think? Is there movement or not?
There's the niceties are pretty good going into the meeting, right? It's not just the comments that Lighthizer made. By the way, he made them to Liz Claman, so Fox News was the one that kind of broke that this morning, Fox Business rather. But there's also a piece, a good editorial in the China Daily, which is the sort of unofficial, official mouthpiece of the Chinese government, suggesting that they do want a deal. They just would like America to meet them halfway. So we're getting everyone saying the right things as we head into this. So we'll see. The market is cautiously optimistic, I think. But because it is President Trump, someone who really does back up his words, they know all of the things that he's saying he would do are not idle threats.
How do you think the White House has played this?
I think they've played it well. The only thing I would have done differently is I probably would have done some sort of primetime talk at the very beginning of it and said, listen, this is what we're doing, this is what we're trying to achieve.
To the American people.
To the American public. And then, you know, maybe a follow-up after China deliberately targeted our farmers to say, listen, you know what, obviously there could be a certain amount of pain. By the same token, though, I'm fighting for Main Street, not Wall Street here. So as you hear Wall Street chime in and continue to talk about consumer prices, know that this really they're talking about their bottom lines, because ultimately Americans do know one thing. You have to have a job before you can care about how much something costs. And I think that's what he's fighting for here.
As far as the optics of that signing ceremony this morning and the president tweeting this just a short time ago, just signed one of the most important and largest trade deals in U.S. and world history. The U.S., Mexico, and Canada worked so well together in crafting this great document. Terrible NAFTA deal will soon be gone. The USMCA will be fantastic for all. How will, and by the way, did you see this as a good thing, and did we get a good deal?
I think we got a good deal. There are a lot of things that brought it into the 21st century. Some of the digital stuff wasn't even covered in NAFTA. You know, so I think the American workers and North American workers got a good deal, and it was something the president promised. Also, we should take also know that. Remember how acrimonious this whole thing was. The Canadian representative, she came out every hour with donuts and, you know, for the press, but the harsh words for the Americans. And a lot of people did not think that deal was going to happen, and they pulled it out. And so, you know, it's just a negotiating style perhaps the world's not used to. It's not statescraft as we're accustomed to. But I think another thing we haven't been accustomed to in this country are results. So people said, don't mess with NAFTA, it can never be done. It was done.
Trudeau had this to say: we need to keep working to remove the tariffs on steel and aluminum between our two countries. And he called the president Donald. So now they're all back on a first-name basis, the gentlemen that they are. Is that the next wrinkle in this, Charles?
I think it is. You know, I'm inclined to agree that we should take them off of Mexico and Canada. Keep them on China, I think, and I would also disagree. You know, the implications that in your prior segment, Juan. You know, General Motors is not a proxy for me with tariffs. General Motors is a proxy for an individual company that made a lot of business mistakes, that their market share in all the great categories keeps going down. The volume of cars they keep selling keeps going down. That they just misjudged their clientele who wants a lot of SUVs. But that being said, you know, we've got the momentum right now. We want to keep the momentum. By the same token, you don't fight these kind of battles unless you can extract the very best deal possible, because this is the last time we get a bite at this apple with respect to China.
We got to leave it there. Right now, markets are down just a small fraction, 20 or so points. Will the markets be watching this G20 summit?
Rubbernecking it all day long. Nothing else will matter. It's like it's like driving down the highway. Like, why did traffic stop? You know,
interesting.
A big 18-wheeler with a bunch of milk cartons all over the place.
I think they call it sun delays where I come from.
Really?
We just hit you right in the windshield.
Yeah.
Thank you, Charles.
All right, guys.
Nice
See you later.
to see you. Well, the standoff between Russia and Ukraine intensifying. Ukraine now calling for help from NATO, and President Trump canceling talks with Putin over the clash. How will this all eventually be resolved?
In the meantime, you got a big new push on the Hill to prevent a government shutdown. Watch that story. Can Republicans hammer out a deal on the border wall? House Majority Whip Steve Scalise is our headliner. He joins us in a moment live, coming up right here.
Growing Growing tensions in Ukraine, where Russian men are now banned from entering the country amid fears of a Russian invasion. Ukraine imposing martial law earlier this week after Russia seized 3 of its ships off the coast of Crimea. Trey Yangst is live in our Mideast Bureau with the latest on this. Trey?
Sandra, as the rhetoric heats up between Russia and Ukraine following that firefight over the weekend off the coast of Crimea, the Ukrainian government is now banning all Russian men ages 16 to 60 from entering the country. Today, reports do indicate that the main focus for this ban will be on the 1,200-mile land border between Russia and eastern Ukraine, although the new restriction does apply to all ports of entry. Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko tweeted today that the ban is being put into place to prevent the Russians from forming private armies within Ukraine. In 2014, Russian-backed separatists in eastern Ukraine used a similar tactic to fight the Ukrainian army. Now, the Ukrainian government also this week stopping all flights from Ukraine to Russia. A spokesperson for the Russian Foreign Ministry indicated Friday that Moscow has no plans to retaliate with similar travel restrictions for Ukrainian citizens. Late last night, a prominent Russian lawmaker said on television that Russia is not interested in war with Ukraine, although both countries do appear to be preparing for a major military confrontation. Now, Sandra, these latest developments do come as 24 Ukrainian sailors do remain held in Russia after they were captured on Sunday. And the latest information that we are getting is 3 of those sailors, all of them captains, have been transferred from a jail in Crimea to a jail just outside of Moscow pending trial. Sandra?
Trey Yangst in Jerusalem for us. Thank you.
Back here at home, Republicans floating a new plan to pay for a border wall. Democrats still holding the line at current spending levels, raising the chance now of a government shutdown. Let's go to our headliner today. We are pleased to have back with us House Majority Whip Steve Scalise. And, sir, good morning to you, and thank you for coming back here.
Morning, Bill and Sandra. Great to be with you.
So what we understand, $5 billion, give or take, maybe not over a year's time, but over 2 years. Is that something that could pass?
What President Trump has talked about is that he needs $5 billion right now to secure the border. And it's a full border security package, including building the wall, including technology, making sure that our Border Patrol agents have the tools they need. You just saw in the last few days, they're being attacked and assaulted by some of the people in this caravan. And the president needs to secure the border. I think it's important for all Americans that we get this done.
Senator Chuck Schumer making his thoughts on this very clear on the Senate floor yesterday. Listen.
He hasn't even spent the $1.3 billion Congress allocated last year in the fiscal year 2018 budget for border security, fences, drones, technology. This isn't actually about border security. This is the president trying to manufacture a shutdown to fire up his base.
Can you respond to that for us, Congressman?
Well, Chuck Schumer's still burned from the last time he shut the government down, and it didn't work for him then. It's not going to work for him now because people know. They see this threat at the border. Look at this caravan. There are already more than 600 known convicted criminals in the caravan. They just arrested another MS-13 gang member 2 days ago as part of this caravan. And President Trump has said, I need the money to fully secure the border. Sure, the first $1.5 billion is out there being spent. That's only a small portion of what it takes to secure the entire American border. So if Chuck Schumer wants to take the position that he's willing to shut the government down because he doesn't want to secure America's border, people see what's happening right now. They know what's at stake, and he'll lose that shutdown like he lost the last shutdown. Hopefully it doesn't happen. We don't want a shutdown. We want to make sure we can secure America's border. President Trump's laid out a very concrete plan that makes a lot of sense to get this done. Let's go and see a bipartisan agreement to secure America's border, especially at a time when we see the assault coming from known criminals. And keep this in mind. Every single day, on average, our Department of Homeland Security stops 10 known terrorists from entering this country. Every single day. We need to secure the border. President Trump has laid out a plan to do it. If Chuck Schumer doesn't want that to happen, if he wants to shut the government down over whether or not to secure the border,
on the potential
that's
of
a failed
that, Congressman,
position.
do you think there will be a government shutdown?
You know, the negotiations are ongoing. We still have a few more days to get this done. I hope we do get it done. But at the end of the day, we need to secure America's border, and we're going to keep battling until we finally get the agreement to make that happen.
Two more topics to get to quickly. James Comey's fighting back, and apparently some of your Republican lawmakers, they want to get James Comey in before them one more time. And you're running up against the calendar here because you're going to toss the gavel over the first week of January. James Comey said this in a tweet. He said, "Today, my legal team filed court papers to get transparency from House Republicans. Let the American people watch." Bob Goodlatte, chairman of the committee, was with us last hour and said the following as to whether or not the Comey testimony will happen. Watch.
We're open to the idea of videotaping it. The fact of the matter is, though, he is trying to run the clock on us.
Trying to run the clock, sir?
I agree with Chairman Goodlatte. Look, we've laid out a number of different options for Comey to come in. You don't get to decide whether or not you want to comply with a compelling order to come and testify before Congress. Ironically, in his tweet, he mentions transparency. The whole idea of getting him to come and testify is to be transparent with the American people, not through leaks, which Comey's good at, but by being sworn in under oath and testifying and telling the truth to the American people about what's going on. Is this a witch hunt? Is this targeted? What's really happening? The only way to get true transparency is not through him trying to leak stuff and write books. It's about swearing him in under oath and getting an honest conversation about getting the facts to the American people.
Congressman Scalise, finally, the president is at this G20 summit at the moment. We don't know yet what all will come out of this. We know he's got a meeting with President Xi, but we do not know if this meeting with Vladimir Putin will be happening. The latest from the White House, the president has called this off. Would you like to see the president meet with Putin?
Well, regardless of whether he meets with him or not, clearly there is a lot of diplomacy going on because what Russia is trying to do with our friends in the Ukraine is wrong, and we're standing up against it. I'm glad that President Trump is standing up to Russia and standing with our friends in the Ukraine. We didn't see that from the previous administration. I'm glad we're seeing it now, and let's bring more of the weight of other countries in the world against what Russia's aggression is doing. It has to stop. Let's back the Ukrainians, and I think the president's going to do that whether he meets in person or whether Secretary Pompeo and others are going to make this more effective at the UN and bring more countries to bear.
Nice to see you, sir. Thank you for your time. Steve Scalise.
Great being back with you.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Congressman. So the escalating crisis in Ukraine looming over this G20 summit, putting new strains on President Trump's relations with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Is the Russian leader testing the president's resolve? Our A-team will be back for that.
Also, there are headlines from Facebook could be doing major damage control. A bombshell report says that Sheryl Sandberg, one of the leading executives, went looking for dirt on George Soros. Why would the social media giant target him? We're looking for answers next, coming up right here after this.
President Trump's efforts to improve relations with Russia being put to the test after the seizure of 3 Ukrainian ships and their crews. The incident casting a shadow over the G20. The A-team is back. Juan Williams, Ed Henry, and Shelby Holliday. So the president is being put to the test here. What do you think is going to come of this challenge, Ed?
I think that it's kind of a do-over for him after Helsinki. He took a lot of flack from folks in his own party, not just Democrats, that he should have stood up stronger to Putin. I think Putin since then has acted even more recklessly on the world stage with what's happening in Ukraine. And I think given what's happened in the Russia investigation as well, it wasn't a coincidence that right after the Michael Cohen development, I mean, the White House may say it's unrelated, but come on, the timing, within minutes, the White House is announcing from Air Force One, never mind that meeting with Putin not happening. And now Putin, as we said earlier, is in a defensive posture, which is not usual for Putin. He's begging for this meeting. So the president has an opportunity to give him that meeting, briefer maybe than it was going to be before. Maybe it's a hallway conversation. But stick a finger in his chest.
Sarah Sanders came out with this statement. We were talking about this 30 minutes ago. Here's her statement. She said the Russian witch hunt hoax, which is hopefully now nearing an end, is doing very well. Unfortunately, it probably does undermine our relationship with Russia. However, the reason for our council meeting is Ukraine. Hopefully that will be resolved soon so that productive conversations can begin, end quote. It probably does undermine our relationship with Russia.
It likely does, and as Ed pointed out, it seemed to have an impact on President Trump's meeting with Vladimir Putin. But what else has an impact on our relationship with Russia is the fact that Michael Cohen testified to Congress and told lies that Russia knew were lies. And this document that he wrote that was public, it was very clear if you were involved in the deal, if you were involved in President Vladimir Putin's press operation over there, that Michael Cohen wasn't being truthful. And so things like that also go into this balancing game between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. And Ed was talking about leverage. Leverage is everything when you're talking about Vladimir Putin. That is how this man rolls. That is what his currency is.
Yeah, a lot of it.
He loves having the upper hand.
So what's curious to me is the world stage. Clearly, the president thought that he could, in fact, create an alliance between the U.S. and Russia, that he could do much better with Putin than previous leaders had done. But what Putin has done in Syria, Putin's continued relationship with Iran, the kind of difficulty that we face about the Khashoggi murder perpetrated by MSB or Bin Laden. MBS. All of that has Russia involved. And the question is, at what point does Trump say to Putin, this has to stop? He has yet to say it.
And he still has leverage. We still have sanctions in place against Russia. We still have a lot of leverage and still have a lot of ability to tell Russia no.
All right, we will have more on that coming up, but we've got to get to this topic. Facebook, we've been seeing them doing a little bit of a damage control. Now there's this report out that Sheryl Sandberg, one of the executives there, went looking for dirt on George Soros, and now Facebook has responded to that bombshell report, saying this: Mr. Soros is a prominent investor, and we looked into his investments and trading activity related to Facebook. That research was already underway when Sheryl sent an email asking if Mr. Soros had shorted Facebook stock. Sheryl never directed research on freedom from Facebook, but as she said before, she takes full responsibility for any activity that happened on her watch. What do you make of that?
I don't know all the details. None of us do. But what it tells me, how the mighty have fallen. I remember not too distant past where Facebook was this behemoth that was going to maybe... It still is, but a positive behemoth, I guess. And the idea was that maybe Mark Zuckerberg will run for president. Maybe Sheryl Sandberg will be president someday. Lean in, and the book, and the bestseller, and transparency. And you find out there wasn't a whole lot of transparency about what was going on in terms of how they handled election ads in 2016. There was that big New York Times piece before this a couple weeks back talking about them digging up dirt on rivals and whatnot. Look, do companies do that? Sure. I'm not, stupid about that. But let me just say, my point is that Facebook was supposed to be the next new thing that was a positive force in this country. And I think they're digging out of a lot of bad pressure.
Run quickly.
For a while, it was a positive force, but I do think that they're under a lot of pressure. And this Sheryl Sandberg, it doesn't show any signs of ending anytime
Well, I
soon.
tell you, there's been a lot of talk about whether or not she stays. And remember, the head of communications at Facebook is now gone after this because he hired a firm that was involved with this. And there's a lot of anti-Semitism attached to the attack on Soros, and that could really damage Facebook.
Juan, thanks. Ed, thanks. Shelby, thanks. You guys have a
Thank you,
great
A-Team.
weekend. Okay, right on.
Thanks. Epic, Ed, by the way.
Epic. That's the word of the day.
It always is. Hotel hacking, one of the biggest changes in the world, announcing a major data breach today. 500 million affected. What to know, how to know if your data has been compromised. Coming up.